More than 250 years ago, there was no United States of America. America was simply a row of English settlements spread along the Atlantic coast. The people who lived here were called colonists. They had sailed 3,000 miles across the dangerous ocean to get to America. They settled in a harsh wilderness so they could escape strict English rules, could practice religion as they wished, and prosper in business. But by the 1770s, some colonists felt that the English still had too much control over their lives. They wanted to break away from England and form their own country. Hi, my name is Oliver Mayhew. I was one of the youngest soldiers ever to serve in America's War for Independence. This is my story of the American Revolutionary War. The colonial period lasted from about 1607 to 1790. During that time, England was a powerful nation with a mighty army and the greatest navy on earth. America consisted of 13 British colonies that each had its own local government, but were owned and ruled by the English King George III. 2.5 million people lived here, but the colonies had no army or navy. We were dependent on England for just about everything. Colonial America was an agricultural land. About 9 out of every 10 families were farmers. We were farmers. We grew food and some of the raw materials that were needed in factories back in England. Our farm was located in the woods of western New Jersey. My father and his brother built the house we lived in. We all worked on the farm. We also helped Mother cook and clean the house. Life in colonial America was simple, but we all worked really hard. As the colonies grew, King George levied taxes on the tobacco, lumber, furs, and cloth that we sent to England. He also taxed all the things we needed from England. By 1765, most Americans felt that King George was taking far too many taxes. Colonists protested, insisting that there be no taxation without representation. Soon, a few colonists hatched a secret plan for revolt. Their plan revolved around tea. The American colonists loved to drink tea, but the British East India Company was the only company allowed to sell tea to Americans. The English had a monopoly on tea and could charge us whatever they liked for it. To Americans, tea became the symbol of British tyranny. So, on December 16, 1773, their plan to defy King George was put into action. Colonists dressed as Indians boarded 3 of the East India Company's ships docked in Boston Harbor. They dumped their cargo of 342 chests of tea into the ocean. King George reacted angrily. He ordered the governor of Massachusetts to close the port until the tea and the tax on it was paid for, putting the colony under British military rule. After the Boston Tea Party, the colonists had had enough. In September 1774, delegates from all 13 colonies met in Philadelphia. During what was called the First Continental Congress, they demanded that the British reopen Boston Harbor, and if they didn't, Americans would be prepared for war.
You can catch more bears without anything.
My father and uncle were like many other colonists. They bought rifles and ammunition and stored them away in secret places on our farm. They also formed a local militia and drilled with other part-time soldiers known as Minutemen. We all vowed to be ready to fight the British on a minute's notice. Things came to a boil when the British learned that colonists were storing weapons in the villages of Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. On the night of April 18, 1775, 700 British troops marched to seize the supplies and squash the rebellion. It was on that night that Paul Revere made his famous midnight ride. When spies warned him that the English were headed toward Lexington, he rode through the Massachusetts countryside, warning his fellow patriots that the British are coming. The colonists would be ready when the British arrived. On the morning of April 19th, British troops encountered a force of local militiamen near the town of Lexington. The Americans were greatly outnumbered. There was an exchange of gunfire. When the smoke cleared, 8 colonists were dead. No one knows who fired the first shot that morning, but ever since the battle at Lexington has been known as the shot heard round the world. The Revolutionary War had begun. Back in Philadelphia, a Second Continental Congress was called in May of 1775. The delegates realized that if they were to defeat the powerful British Army, they would have to combine each of the colony's militia forces. They formed the American Continental Army and sent a famous inventor and statesman, Benjamin Franklin, to the French court of King Louis XVI in Paris. There, Franklin appealed to the French government for help. When it came time to elect a commander of the new Continental Army, the delegates chose a 43-year-old from Virginia, George Washington. Before long, every town and city in the colonies began signing up soldiers.
Soldier!
There was no age limit for Americans who wanted to join. One company had a commanding officer who was 96. Boys as young as 10 joined as drummers, flag carriers, and water boys. Soon, there were more volunteers than there were muskets to shoot. In June 1776, the Congress met again in Philadelphia to draft a document announcing to Britain that we were no longer one of their colonies. The Declaration of Independence, written by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, stated that the United States of America was now free and independent. It was published on July 4th, 1776, which became our national birthday. There was no going back now. The Revolutionary War would have to be fought to the finish. My father, uncle, and older brother joined the New Jersey Light Infantry, and I joined right along with them. Most mothers and young children stayed at home and took care of the farm, but my mother wanted to help the Continental Army. She and my younger brothers cooked for the soldiers and kept camp for us. My middle brother was apprenticed to a blacksmith and helped keep us supplied with the iron tools the Army needed.
Very easily.
My cousin helped the gunsmith keep our unit's muskets working.
Now go back over this.
In the beginning, Continental troops simply wore their own clothes, like my uncle. But soon, King Louis XVI sent us blue wool uniforms from the French Army. The double-breasted coats were functional. They folded over and buttoned up for warmth in the winter. Some uniforms included a cap called a tricorn. Our infantry caps were different. They were covered with animal pelts to protect our heads from enemy sabers. Infantry soldiers carried powder horns and cartridge boxes over their shoulders. We wore overalls we called knee breeches, stockings, and half gaiters to protect our lower legs. The British uniforms were made of red wool coats, but they were too warm and cumbersome for the climate in America. By June of 1776, King George hired German mercenaries known as Hessians to help his British troops quell the American rebellion. My father said you could always tell Hessian soldiers by their green coats and fierce fighting. Life in the Continental Army was a lot different than back on the farm. It was dangerous, and we were always moving from battle to battle. We had to carry everything we needed with us. I carried my hatchet, a canteen for water, and a haversack over my shoulders. At night, we slept in rows of canvas tents that had to be portable. In the morning, they were packed up and carried on to our next camp. The tents were held up with wooden poles. We used straw for bedding and to block the wind from blowing under our tents, and animal skins for blankets. We carried wooden chests with us. They held everything from canteens to cartridge boxes and our personal items when we didn't need them. We marked the top of the box with the name of our unit. We always made camp near a good supply of fresh water and wood, and carried the water in buckets made of wood or canvas. My mother did the cooking for our unit, but sometimes the sergeant or corporal's wife would also prepare our meals. We ate whatever we could find nearby. My favorite meal was biscuits baked in a cast iron Dutch oven and pancakes. Just about everything we used was handmade, even our wooden plates. Cooking equipment was made of iron. Since it was difficult to find supplies, blacksmiths and leathersmiths often traveled right along with the army. Since we were always on the move, we wore out a lot of shoes. A cordwainer would often set up shop near camp. He could fit you for new shoes in a few minutes. In colonial times, one shoe fit both feet.
The way you get a Colonial shoe to feel comfortable on your foot is when you buy a new shoe, you fill it full of water, and then you pour the water out and you put the shoe on and wear it till it dries. Then it will form to your foot.
Some units had their own joiners. Since we didn't have nails, wood had to be skillfully joined together with dovetail joints.
The dovetails that I'm cutting here, it's fitting the tails together. I built this box with dovetails, but then hid it in hide the way they did. So this is called a hide box because it's covered in a hide. I have another chest here that has open dovetails that you can see, which would really be a poor man's blanket chest.
When we were in camp, everyone had a job to do. Most of the time, I was assigned to chop wood. Other soldiers would fill rifle cartridges with gunpowder and load the cartridge boxes. Others would repair clothing or torn canvas tents. When there was enough gunpowder, soldiers would take time to practice their marksmanship.
Fire!
Firing a flintlock was complicated and took a long time.
You pour that in the barrel and press it right through the wood block, and it will go right down into the barrel.
A small portion of powder is poured into the pan.
It's going down the lands and grooves.
And pour the rest of the powder down the barrel.
Bring it back to full cock.
And you tamp it home.
A real expert could only fire about 3 shots in a minute. A few Hessian soldiers had an advantage over the Americans. Their rifles had 2 barrels.
It's a flintlock rifle. By depressing the forward trigger, I freeze a barrel to rotate the second barrel into line. Since a rifle takes almost 3 minutes to load, having a second shot available in under 10 seconds gives me a significant advantage on the field.
Both sides in the American Revolution fought with 3 different kinds of weapons: cannons, sabers, and bayonets, and guns. Since I was too young to fire a flintlock, I was assigned to carry the flag. Other boys became drummers. Drummers are important in the Army. Drum beats motivated the soldiers to march ahead and helped communicate commands to the troops. Others became messengers, water boys, and brought gunpowder to the artillery units. Although we didn't fight with guns, the war was still very dangerous and the stakes were high. The British promised if we lost the war, many of us would be sent to prison or killed. The Revolutionary War lasted for 6 years and was fought in many different places. Famous battles took place in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia, and as far north as Canada. We also fought the British in South Carolina and Georgia. The war took place at sea too. There were violent clashes between American, French, and British ships on the ocean and with forces on land. The final battle of the Revolutionary War took place at Yorktown, Virginia on October 17, 1781. After French and American cannons destroyed the British fortifications there, Major General Lord Cornwallis called for a truce. On October 19th, as his sword was surrendered, over 8,000 British soldiers laid down their arms for good. 6 months later, peace talks began in Paris. It took over a year before the final treaty was signed on September 3, 1783. 8.5 years after Paul Revere made his famous midnight ride and the shot heard round the world rang out over Lexington, America was finally a free and independent nation. With the Revolutionary War over, my family returned to our farm in New Jersey, where, before long, we all got back to life pretty much as it was before the war broke out. In the years to come, my middle brother would grow up to own his own blacksmith shop. My cousin became an artist.
I'm gonna let it play out. Whenever it gets to where this flat place plays out, I'm gonna let this.
One of my sisters married a neighbor and raised a large family. And I went to college and became a senator from New Jersey. Like my family, the United States grew steadily after the Revolutionary War as well. By purchase and by conquest, America would one day become the richest and most powerful nation on earth. But it was the hard work and sacrifices we all made during the Revolutionary War that laid the foundation for the country that you live in today.